In this series of conversations, we'll be discussing global food sustainability with guests who bring a deep understanding of the environmental and cultural challenges facing our society, and creative ideas on how to address them. I'm Ash Sweeting, and welcome to the Ash Cloud. Today we are joined by Anthony Carrigan, the CEO of the Kyeema Foundation. Frequently small things can make a huge difference, especially when working with marginalised communities. 1 or 2 chickens can revolutionise a family's nutritional and economic security by providing much needed protein and income. Kyeema began with a mission to protect these birds from disease. Anthony and his team are working with communities in Africa and in the Pacific to build local food resilience and create circular economies.
Kyeema works to improve the health and prosperity of marginalised communities and their environment globally, which is the tagline, but is also, I'm pleased to say, actually really the pragmatic way that Kyeema goes about work.
Understanding the community and their needs is critical.
What's a solution that the local person and the person who may not be resource rich can use to affect an immediate change? So give them some nutrition or give them some small income that will also assist them longer term.
Local resources drive a sustainable system.
Once you start having to buy food for chickens, the economics of it, for a village chicken, the economics of it start to tip into the negative.
Globally, smallholder farmers still feed the vast majority of the world's population, and women do much of the work.
I think 80% of the world's food is still produced by small-scale farmers. Women make up 40% plus.
That's 80% of the world's food is still produced by smallholder farmers.
And I mean, the 80% seems large. So I want to go and check my figures on that. But that's certainly the female labour, that 43% of agricultural labour in developing countries, is something that we also need to address and support. Sometimes they produce stats around 20 to 30% less than a male counterpart farmer down the road because of compounding layers of exclusion. So we feel that equalising that gap, so being able to support female smallholder farmers, is going to actually boost agricultural output and decrease hunger.
AJ, thank you very much for joining me today. Could you please tell me what you're doing at Kyeema, at the Kyeema Foundation, what the challenges you're facing, and a bit about where you're working?
Mate, yeah, I'd love to, and thanks for having me on the podcast too. It's a great one, and it's always good to catch up with old colleagues and friends. So look, Kyeema works to improve the health and prosperity of marginalised communities and their environment globally, which is the tagline, but is also, I'm pleased to say, actually really the pragmatic way that Kyeema goes about work. So we started, it's probably easiest to describe by, excuse my, I'm out of breath. It started by a group of veterinary and ag scientists who wanted to promote a model of Newcastle disease control, which sounds like an incredibly niche thing to do. This is 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. But if you think about Newcastle disease, it kills around 50% to 100% of chickens every time there's an outbreak, and it's endemic across Asia and Africa. And if you think of chickens as really one of the key sources of protein for the poorest of the poor, and particularly village chickens, which work on a pretty neat little economic model. So once you start having to buy food for chickens, the economics of it, for a village chicken, the economics of it start to tip into the negative. In addition, also, if you're thinking about village chickens, they are usually sometimes not native to an area. We wouldn't call a scrub turkey native chicken, but there are birds that are more native to regions, and so they're more resilient animals. They can forage for food more easily. They can live on other things, and they don't need the kind of additional nutrients that a broiler chicken and other sort of thing would need. So they're already a slightly more sustainable and resilient bird or source of protein. And then, they can quite easily and cheaply be fed. We call them petty cash on legs. So that you can sell the eggs, you can sell the chickens. And I actually, even thinking back to my youth as a little kid in Toowoomba, we had Toowoomba here in Australia. We had some chickens in the backyard that my brother tended to, and they were just a reliable source of eggs that mum and dad didn't have to reach into the pocket. We had a big family, single income, that sort of thing, and we had a couple of other friends who were like that, and single mother families, particularly having the chickens there, you can be pretty confident that if you can get that single egg a day into a kid, you're going to stave off some stunting and malnutrition. And so I guess Kyeema looked at that in terms of those, not in Australia, but in those very marginalised communities, in those very poor communities. And then, Professor Peter Spradbroke from the University of Queensland, with some funding from ACRIAR, the Australian Centre for International Ag Research, they developed a thermo-tolerant vaccine for Newcastle disease for village chickens. Not relying on a stable chain of refrigeration made it much easier to deliver in difficult environments and difficult circumstances. So that had been developed. The foundation came up with to fund the distribution and production of that vaccine. There's some smart characters involved in the start of it, as well as Dr. Robin Albers, Stuart Rutledge, and others. And one of the things they added to it, which is another part of the wonderful pragmatism that's gone on with Kyeema, is they would train vaccinators. So you have a community vaccinator program. So again, usually women are trained as vaccinators. They can earn money vaccinating chickens in the villages. Go out and protect the flocks and as well as get a bit of skill and self-confidence and whatnot. So that's where it started. And I think the first real round was in Mozambique. The program's still going in Mozambique. It's expanded a lot in that area. And, our core countries for Kyeema are Mozambique, Ethiopia, PNG, and then in Malawi as well. We work with the Rural Poultry Centre, Pat Boland, over there in Malawi. So they're our core countries at the moment, but we have had programs in a whole lot of other places, particularly in East Africa as well. And we're always getting opportunities to expand the program. So that's the kind of core part of it is small scale nutrition, livestock, Newcastle disease vaccination. But over time, as you'd expect, over 20 years, it's expanded out to cover a few other things. A couple of really interesting things more recently that for me typify a tie-in with the early work. So we're working up in central province of PNG on locally managed marine environments. So along the coastline in central province and places like Buell Island, climate change has impacted coral reefs, so the temperature of the water, and then also just degradation through removal of mangroves for fuel and building materials and whatnot. So we're working with a couple of organisations in PNG and one in Fiji, Corals for Conservation, to train local marine scientists and then local community people on coral reef restoration. So how do you go out and select thermotolerant corals and more diverse corals and just genuinely start rebuilding and restoring a reef, which clears the water, gets the reef fish back and all that sort of thing. And for that period where you can't fish on that reef, we've set up master farmer programs for chickens. So they've got an alternative source of protein to the fish, a little bit of extra income from selling the eggs or selling the chickens. And same goes for the mangrove restoration stuff. So and we're also looking at some other things in terms of mangrove restoration that might encourage the protection of the mangroves along those regions. Because I think Ewell Island, with the loss of mangroves, they're losing sort of meters a year in the actual beach, the island. So that's the core business of Kyeema, which for us, sticks with our vision of working with marginalised communities. And when we're talking marginalised, we mean communities that are a higher risk of poor outcomes due to economic, socio-political, or economic instability. And we work almost exclusively with partners in country. It's interesting. Somebody was asking me the other day about DFAT have got a localization push at the moment. I was working in the US for the USA Forward area, and it always occurred to me that I don't know how you could call it development if you're not working with local partners. It's not. So I'm pleased that's really part of the Kyeema ethos. And so we have that broad focus on sustainable agriculture and food security as part of the core of the organisation. We also work with corporate partners at the moment, Palladium, for example. So Palladium sets aside 1.5% of their pre-tax profit. And then we work with them on 3 grant funding rounds. There's a humanitarian round, a communities round, and a challenge fund round. And the challenge fund, for example, it's out at the moment, was actually just closed. There was one for jobs for refugees, and the other one was valuing nature. So, assessing the cost and value return on nature-based solutions and nature programs, and that sort of thing. So that those programs, we still the activities that come out of them, the grants that come out of them, still sort of sit within the Kyeema vision. And they also offer an opportunity for Palladium staff to become involved in doing those projects. I mean, Palladium's a relatively mission-driven organisation. Bulk of its money still comes from development work, but as a commercial managing contractor, sometimes the staff don't have the opportunity to be as deeply involved in community-based projects or humanitarian-based projects. So these challenge funds give them the opportunity to do that, and Kyeema assists with developing the local partnerships and administering and whatnot, and helping in the Palladium do the selection, but we do the process for assessment and selection. And so I guess
if you take a little step back from what you're saying and go back to the chickens and to a lesser extent the reefs, humans have been using poultry as a recycler and a waste disposal, recycling food waste, but also picking through the dung of grazing animals and getting rid of the parasites, etc., for thousands of years. And in some ways, the coral reef side of things, the nutrients are flying off the land into the ocean, and the reef is this vibrant ecosystem that's about recycling or reusing. It's a natural-based one rather than a human-instigated one, but it's about that circularity of the system, of the food system or the natural system. How primary is that process to your philosophy and the work you're trying to do?
Yeah, look, it is in that space. It is that like the circular nature of that, the ability to for those village chicken programs to be self-sustaining. it's interesting. I think back to a piece of work I did a few years ago with the government of Oman on their food security master plan, and at that point, you could get a Brazilian chicken, essentially a dressed chicken, in the shops in Oman for about $2, which is mind blowing, comparatively speaking.
So this is a frozen Brazilian produced chicken that's been generally a very small bird, less than a kilogram. I'm imagining.
Yeah, and produced God knows how, and then transported God knows how. But it's that kind of market pressure is hard to compete with at a larger scale. But when you get down to poorest of the poor, trying to get them off the idea that going to buy that relatively unsustainable chicken as opposed to something that could also be bringing them income without a great deal of cost, and is also involved in that cleaning up process, that sort of thing, seems to make a lot of sense. And but what it needs is a bit of a kickstart, a bit of a push, so a bit of a training on how to keep them, how to keep them safe, and how to set up for them. So yeah, from that perspective, and then I guess it's probably the more circular nature, the cleaning and the kind of regenerative agriculture space of it is more clear for me in the locally managed marine areas kind of stuff, because when you start to see the results of the mangrove regrowth, so when there's a storm surge coming in, it's not degrading the beaches, or the coral regrowth, that it's just the pictures of the water, it's clean, fish are coming back even within a space of less than 12 months, and people become they're more proud of their local environment and that sort of thing than they were before. So from that perspective, yeah, it is. We are trying to push that circular nature. I guess in some ways at this point, Kyeema is not going to be influencing the big agricultural market stuff. We are very much at the community level, but we're the push for commercialized farming isn't always going to be accessible to the poorest, the most poor communities. So that's what we're trying to target, is give a bit of security to those most poor communities. If you look at the way markets are going at the moment, there's countries that are banning exports. Argentina, India, I think it's just banned wheat exports in May. They were, I think, citing a yield 20% yield loss from climate events for that. But there is a sense of food insecurity, and I think it's even been felt in the most protected suburbs of Australia, where you go to the shops and Woolworths and whatnot, and the shelves are a little more empty, for a variety of reasons. There's been floods, there's supply chain issues and that sort of thing, which might be an inconvenience for some people, but for other people it's a devastating loss of nutrient. You're worried about stunting for your children or malnutrition or other sort of things. So yeah, that's where we're aimed at with this work.
On that note, you kind of alluded to what I was thinking and what I was looking at asking you, but it's about the resilience of a food supply, a food supply system, and we've had a very efficient supply system over the last 20 years. You've lived in the Middle East and places like that where 90 odd or 95% of the food is imported, a lot of it by air, by ship, by various routes. And you walk into the grocery store in Abu Dhabi or Oman, and you've got a plethora of all sorts of things from all over the world. But it's relied on this abundance of food, relatively cheap food, and these transport or logistics networks that provided that delivered there. However, I guess a combination of things like the pandemic and fewer airlines and what that's done to supply chains, plus the war in Ukraine, which has driven up food price spikes, has shown that efficiency is great when nothing goes wrong.
Exactly.
But if things go wrong, then you need resilience. So, is there anything you have to add to that?
Yeah, look, I mean it's a great point to make, because we're what we're seeing now is there's a bunch of events that have come to make it more difficult. So you've got, you might have floods in Australia, you've got mega drought in the US, you've got the war in Ukraine. Obviously, there are conflicts in different countries in Africa. And there are, China is flexing its muscle and closing its borders in some sense. And so this is where, the FAO talked about the four pillars for disaster risk resilience. And I think we're in a space where we are relying on those four pillars at the moment. They're trying to get institutional strengthening and good governance. So there's plenty of countries at the moment that have had weak governance. There's certainly plenty of countries with political instability and conflict. So there's got to be efforts to get that institutional strengthening in there. There's also information and early warning systems as a second pillar. So we've got to know actually where is the breakdown in supply, and where is it going to become absolutely critical. Sri Lanka would be an example of that at the moment, where breakdown in government and supply is as exacerbated a disaster that's going on. Then the third pillar is about response preparation. So are they, is there a playbook in place for sort of household, village, district? Indonesia's an example of a good country that does have a pretty good, village resilience playbook for this sort of stuff. I'm not sure it's really set up for food insecurity. And then, there's the resilience building and Kyeema, which is around technologies and practices. And I think Kyeema plays a little bit in the space both of, oddly enough, information and early warning systems. So trying to get the monitoring and evaluation out there when we're doing either vaccination programs, or when we're doing, master farmer or programs. We're taking data on, well, what are people eating, what are they lacking, and where are they getting it from. That needs to be fed up into systems so you can get a bigger picture of it. And then there's a resilience builder. So technologies to monitor where the food is going, and then practices to maintain resilience at the very local community level. So I think in terms of what needs to be done to assist in that disaster risk resilience, and we are in a long play disaster. I think it's probably fair to say we do have to hit those four pillars, and I think there's plenty of efforts going on at institutional and government levels on pillars 1 and pillar 3, but I think it's organisations like Kyeema and your own and others that are looking at pillar 2 and pillar 4 in that resilience building.
How do you see the balance between managing, the shorter immediate term with the longer term, and then also, I guess, managing the technical challenge compared with the more human, the more social and cultural challenges?
Yeah, great question. two big parts to it. I think we at Kyeema, at least, we do try and take as longer term picture as we can. Right? So because there is, I'll take Australia's biosecurity expenditure as an example. I think there's been a bunch of cuts in biosecurity expenditure over the last 10 years, 15 years, because there weren't a lot of extant threats, or, the quarantine system was seen to be pretty good and all that sort of thing. So that we cut some of that funding domestically. Now, Australia's got foot and mouth disease in Indonesia, other sort of diseases, monkeypox is here, other zoonotics and other things are right on the doorstep, and literally a short boat ride away from the Australian shoreline, and potentially here. And so that kind of short-term view about expenditure on biosecurity and biosecurity practice is starting to come back and bite with a much potentially greater grip strength. So from Kyeema's perspective, we founded on the notion of vaccinating. So we're thinking about the worst possible factors going on. So in the same way that for all of our programs, we look for what's a solution that the local person and the person who may not be resource rich can use to affect an immediate change. So give them some nutrition, or give them some small income that will also assist them longer term. That's the kind of things we focus on. We're not, an organisation that's going to go and do a food drop or do vending machines or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I might have missed the second part of that question.
Cultural versus technical.
Yeah, cultural versus
the human side of it compared to I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley, and there's a tendency to think that there's a technology that will solve all of our woes or improve lives for everyone. But when I was back working in Abu Dhabi, and we worked out that of the farm workers, 2/3 of them had never had a single day of schooling in their entire life, and we were managing water use, and we found out that the most appropriate technology that we could provide was a watch, a timing device that said, turn on the irrigation, and after X number of minutes, depending on the time of year, turn it off. So it's how you balance that, the cultural versus the technical.
Yeah, look, I think Kyeema is in a good position in some ways, where it has been traditionally, because a lot of our work has been focused on. I think we say there's some organisations that underestimate the academic capacity of a lot of countries that are suffering these difficulties. Kyeema, because we work in with the African Union PANVAC, and we work in with local institutions and local scientists and whatnot. There is actually an incredible intellectual capacity there that is supported then by people who have parents who lived in that village, and their grandparents have lived in that village, and they know what which are the better birds and which are the areas that are better, and what we're finding in PNG. So even in the next couple of weeks, we're taking 20 marine scientists or people from local marine science organisations, so the PNG Conservation Environment Protection Agency, taking them to Fiji to do a training course on coral reef restoration. And then they're all going back to the 6 Pacific countries to then spread that training and capacity there. So, and when we're working with the local community in PNG, that nobody knows those local marine environments better than them. They grew up swimming in them. They know, they can see just from their own memory where the water's changed and where the beaches eroded and that sort of thing. So from that perspective, I I think there's an underestimation from some larger programs about the capacity that's out there. The other side of it is, technology is it's so much better than even the 10, 20 years ago. There's so much stuff that you can do on a smartphone now. There's data capture that you can do on a smartphone. Monitoring the valuation systems. Can pick up data from so many sources and aggregate it and spit it back out to
well, there's the one of my favorite examples is M-Pesa in Kenya, and how that just it was all about, rather than having cash, they transferred mobile phone credit, and suddenly you just created up these networks of small traders, and all the transactions were going on over not even smartphones, the old standard jobbies.
I was working in Kenya. I remember making a transaction on M-Pesa, and then I went back home to the States and had to go and pay my rent by a check. I'd written out a check in 20 years since school. So yeah, look there, and there is, I think there's a lot of health programs that are doing data capture on even the most basic mobile phones and that sort of thing. So there is a place for technology. There has to be a place for technology, because it's now all pervasive.
Are there any particular technologies that you are advocating using for your stakeholders, or you're trying to actually push the development of?
We're a bit small to have particular. We are developing an M&E platform that's kind of, we're working with an organisation here to pilot an M&E platform that's tailored really for the type of development projects that we do. We're also we're seeking funding at the moment, actually, for a way to get carbon credit calculation, and this is probably a problem that Vera and other much larger organisations have been spending time on. But we're trying to work out a way, taking mangroves restoration as a perfect example. We've got pretty small scale mangrove restoration, so we're talking 100 metres coastline at a time and that sort of thing. What we'd like to be able to do is say, okay, well, carbon credit that can come out of that is worth whatever it is in the market at the moment. But how do you calculate that to be able to pay a return to the person who is, regrowing that mangrove or whatnot? And I think at the moment, and this is a new area for me, I think at the moment the economics don't stack up, so there's not enough return on that to actually calculate that reinvestment. So we're working to try and see if there's a way, I don't know, to bring that down to a very small scale, or that doesn't necessarily involve just packaging it in with a whole bunch of other areas, because we want to be able to return those funds to the community, as opposed to them going to another organisation that then might do things in the community, but it's not the community doing. It's that do it with us, not to us, kind of principle. So they're one of the great sort of portions of being in development for a good few years that I feel is never it's never really lauded as much as it could be, is the capacity to get quality data. And Kyeema, we're a very science-driven organisation, so we're pretty focused on getting data with integrity, but getting that and having some transparent results out of it. There's some things that we're doing, there's no doubt that we're learning by doing, which is because it might be a new thing, but in learning by doing, the important part of it is, okay, if you're learning by doing, be transparent about what the results of that learning by doing are. So you can't just say we're doing it; it might fail, but you've got a lesson that you can learn out of that. One of the things I think that doesn't get lauded really out of development projects because, and this is changing over time, but because people would rather have a picture of someone digging ditches and hugging poor people, as opposed to saying, well, okay, here's the statistics on the the agricultural return from that plot of land, or here's the fish return stats or whatever. So the technologies that we're looking for are ones that can make the development outcome more transparent. And that might be more transparent in things that didn't work as well as things that did work. And then you have the difficulty of making those cultural changes more transparent, and seeing how people feel about things.
On that note, where do you see the greatest vulnerabilities in terms of longer term food sustainability and food security for the communities, both the ones you've worked with over the last 20 odd years and the ones you're working with now?
I'm going back to Oman. I do recall at the time, because there was, as you get in the Middle East a little bit, there's a notion that, well, let's go and buy a portion of the country, farm it, and return it here. And what we're seeing now is political instability and conflict. Countries are exercising their parliamentary sovereignty or their nutritional sovereignty in some ways, and they're banning exports. And regardless of the ownership structure, that they're going to lock up that food for people within that country. I think that is that's going to be a growing threat, and it's going to mean that countries that don't have either don't have capacity for internal production or options on different production supply chains are that's going to cause them immediate pain. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, I think there is now just general understanding that some of the practice that is impacting the climate needs to change. There's investments are going to change in it. I think this week, the first ever superannuation fund deliberately pulled out of funding oil search activities. So NGS, which is, I don't know, is a particularly big fund, but they said specifically we're divesting organisations like Woodside and others. And I wonder whether, in terms of food production practice, eventually the investment side will catch up, and they say, well, you know what, we're not going to invest in that unsustainable production practice. Let's go back to either I don't know whether they'll actually take the step of investing in sustainable agriculture at local levels. I think they're more likely just to put their money somewhere else. So I think that's a medium-term threat, and it's all exacerbated by the situation in Ukraine, by the tension coming in the Pacific from Chinese activity and whatnot, and not just Chinese activity, activity of all players in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm. And once again, both from your experience at Kyeema and previously, are you seeing any changes in the roles of livestock in sustainable production systems over the years? And if you are, what changes are you seeing?
Yeah, look, there's certainly changes in livestock management, and an understanding. I mean, Indonesia is a great example, I think, where you look at a country that has a system of wet markets that are important for local consumers, but are also a huge disease vector for there are organisations that are doing good work to either uprate those wet markets and abattoirs and that sort of thing, and to be able to say there can be a diverse source of protein available to people at a reasonable cost. So that, I think in the past that might have just been considered in the too hard basket, or it would be considered from outside. It's okay, well then let's do everything here and send it off to them at a greater cost. So it's good that the investment is now coming in to say, okay, well, it's good to be able to butcher locally and work locally, so you can get better breeds of whatever livestock it is and butcher it safely and that sort of thing. So I think there are advances in livestock management. We've seen certainly in Australia the live meat export trade has come under incredible pressure, and fortunately I think some less than ideal partners or players have stepped out of it, and some of the ones that are left are doing good things, both in their livestock management at the production end and then at the other end as well. I guess there are also, from the Kyeema perspective, there's not enough change necessarily to be able to have resilient food security in the poorest of the poor areas still. I mean, that's an ideal. We may never get there. It's growing. Like the capacity to do that good is growing, and we'd like to think we're contributing to that. But I think the work that you've discussed around reduction in methane production, that sort of thing, these are, I wouldn't say unavoidable. They're almost they're absolute necessities in pivot points for agricultural production, and they're cool because they're using smart science and smart ideas to still maintain a good product and get a return for the producers and investors and that sort of thing, and hopefully they'll epitomise some bit of sustainability in those products.
Thank you very much, mate. Is there anything else that I've missed that you think we should talk about?
No, look, I think I'm just flicking over some notes actually. I mean, I still, it's important for one of the things that we have to keep in mind at Kyeema, bearing in mind that we don't just do chickens and small scale livestock. We're doing a lot of other stuff with and we're expanding what we're doing with the diversity of marginalised communities. A lot of it does come back to that one health notion, of animal health, human health, environmental. But I think 80% of the world's food is still produced by small scale farmers. Women make up the 40% plus.
That's 80% of the world's food is still produced by smallholder farmers, and a majority of those are women who are actually out there in the fields doing.
And I mean, the 80% seems large. So I'd want to go and check my figures on that. But that's certainly the female labour, that 43% of agricultural labour in developing countries, is something that we also need to address and support. In that, sometimes they produce stats around 20 to 30% less than a male counterpart farmer down the road because of compounding layers of exclusion. As particularly smallholders, and then as women who may not have as much voice in the community. So we feel that equalising that gap, so being able to support female smallholder farmers, is going to actually boost agricultural output and decrease hunger, because there's output going to more like a broad spread of agricultural output. So that's one thing. It'd be it's good for us to highlight. I'm the first male CEO that Kyeema has ever had, and I am blessed by standing on the shoulders of scientific female intellectual giants, it's so it behooves me to really be a champion for that, for women in small scale agricultural production. I come from a farming family, and where my nana, I think, drove a lot of the production scheduling, at least, when her husband died quite young. So that's one area I think that the science can help as well. So the understanding of the statistics, and then being able to tilt some of that support to female farmers, and there's always a push for STEM, and the push for STEM is going on. From my perspective, I work with brilliant female scientists, and the more of those we get, the more I think we're going to be able to boost fair agricultural production.
That is wonderful to hear, the work you're doing in that space. And it's also a great, I guess, eye-opener for so many Westerners, be that Australians, especially Australians, but also Europeans or North Americans, where the cliched picture of a farmer is a guy with a big hat and big pair of boots, and it shows that our perspectives or our are not as necessarily as accurate as we might have, as the cliches or the stereotypes allude to.
Indeed, hopefully. But yeah.
Okay, well, AJ, cheers, mate. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Mate, as always, great to talk to you.
You've been listening to The Ash Cloud with me, Ash Sweeting, in conversation with Anthony Carrigan from the Kyeema Foundation, recorded in California in August 2022.